request for bill introductions. Earl?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Earl Lewis with the Kansas Department of Agriculture. I've got two bills I would request introduction. The first is in regards to our Water Structures Act and Dam Safety Program. It has an RS number of 25RS0345. And then the second one is modifications to the state's Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. RS number is 25RS0381. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions?
So the dam safety RS number is 25RS0345, and Conservation Reserve Enhancement, or CREP, is 25RS0381.
Is there an objection? Seeing none, those are two bills are introduced. Are there further introductions?
And committee members, Leo Henning. I'm with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. I'm the Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment. And I'd like to introduce a bill that proposes to extend the permit renewal period for certain Clean Water Act water treatment systems from 5 years to 10 years. The RS number for this bill would be 25RS0383.
Are there any questions? Are there any objections? Seeing none, your bill's introduced.
Thank you.
Are there any further introductions? Okay. Just a little housekeeping here, and in your file you'll find a copy of the House Water Committee rules. Those have been modified slightly from last year's committee rules, and what we're trying to do is have uniform and consistent committee rules across all the committees that members attend. I believe they're a good set of rules. If there's no objections, those will be adopted. Seeing none, we'll move forward. This morning we have a presentation on the Kansas Water Plan with the Kansas Water Authority, Don Buehler.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. It's great to be here this morning. I was a little brisk walking in this morning. I'm the chair of the Kansas Water Authority, and this morning I want to talk to you about our annual report, and then I'll be followed by Julie Lorenz today. She's coming back to dive into more details on the Kansas Water Plan implementation framework. So I wanted to orient you to a couple of documents. So the first one is the annual report. That's the document that I'll go through. And then Julie will go through this implementation framework document. Also in your packet, you should have received 3 flyers. And those flyers give you an overview and some more detailed information that we hope will be beneficial as you try to wrap your arms around all of this information. All right. So I believe I have a PowerPoint, sir. Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right. So for some of you that are not familiar with the Kansas Water Authority, it was established in 1981. It's within and a part of the Kansas Water Office. We are all volunteers. We're in an advisory role. I do not work for the state of Kansas. I'm appointed, along with the rest of the members of the Water Authority that are voting members. There are 13 voting members and 11 ex officios. Our responsibilities are to advise the governor, the legislature, and the director of the Kansas Water Office on water policy issues, to approve the Kansas Water Plan, which was approved in 2022, to develop recommendations for the State Water Plan expenditures, to approve federal contracts such as those that we have with our federal reservoirs, and to prepare and issue this annual report to the governor and the legislature. So there are some key points of the annual report that I want to talk about today. We're going to discuss the Senate sub for House Bill 2302 with successful 2 rounds of funding. And also I want to talk to you briefly about our policy recommendations and some additional information that we have. So the Water Authority, is all across the state, representing different entities. So for example, I live south of Eudora in rural Douglas County, and I was appointed by Governor Kelly. But you look at Lynn Goosen, who is in Colby, Kansas, represents groundwater management districts 1, 3, and 4. So if you look at the different categories, you can see where folks live and their representation on the Kansas Water Authority. And these are the 13 voting members. The 11 ex officios are our experts in the room. They're the head of the agencies, such as Connie Owen and Earl Lewis and Leo Henning. They give us advice and counsel as we work to do the work of the Kansas Water Authority. We also have 14 regional advisory committees. We have over 140 people across Kansas that represent different parts of the state and represent different interests. So if you look at the map that we have up here on the slide deck, the eastern part of the state is categorized by watershed. So you have the Mayor-Dezine watershed, the Equus-Walnut, and then if you move towards the western side of the state, they're more in line with groundwater management districts. But I like to call these folks our boots on the ground. I was on a regional advisory committee for about 4 or 5 years before I was appointed to the Water Authority. It's some of the best work that I think that I've done in my career. I have the opportunity, and they have the opportunity, to establish priority goals for their region of the state. They hold meetings across the state to discuss their priorities, and they send those priorities to the Kansas Water Authority. And then once a year, we have those chairs of each regional advisory committee come to the Water Authority meeting and give us an update on the things that they're working on and what are their greatest challenges. What are the things that they're still challenged with that we've been unable to solve? All right, so I'd like to take you through the annual report. And the annual report is keeping with the responsibilities of the Water Authority to advise the governor and the legislature on Kansas water policy matters and to share the priorities that were identified by the Water Authority this last year. It also contains our policy and budget recommendations and updates on initiatives from the previous fiscal year. So if you turn to page 1, there's the table of contents. Page 2 is a letter from the chair of the Kansas Water Authority, and page 3 is the information about the membership of the Water Authority. So if you'd like to go back and review some of the information that I've given you this morning, you can find that information. So I'll bring your attention to page 7. You might notice if you've been on this committee for a bit that this report is different this year. We're working hard to bring you transparent information and to be accountable for the expenditures in the State Water Plan Fund. So this is highlights of the investments and accomplishments across Kansas. Pages 8 and 9 give you some more detailed information on some of the highlights of the budget accomplishments. And then the Kansas Water Office will, I believe, come back to your committee and give you more detailed budget information at a later date. But I'd really like to spend a little bit of time on pages 10 and 11. So first is the FY 2024 period of House Bill 2302 grant programs. So first, I'd like to say a sincere thank you. A thank you for all of the dollars that have been put into the State Water Plan Fund. We all have been working very hard, including all of you. We know that we have a lot of challenges across the state, and that one of the things that's really critical is funding the State Water Plan. It was underfunded for a long time, but in recent years, the legislature has given a much-needed boost to the efforts across the state. We still have a lot of challenges, and you'll hear about those from Julie Lorenz in her presentation. But I want to talk a little bit about the progress that we have made, because my motto is, in my day job, that small progress is still progress, and we should celebrate the small progress. So in 2024 application period, we had funding for $18 million for the grant program. And if you recall, part of the House Bill 2302 grant program was to create funding for technical assistance and for water projects. So there's two grant funds. There was $18 million available, but there were 309 applications submitted. And this information is on page 11. 309 applications submitted, 380 million in total requests, of which we had 18 million available to award. Now, I'm the first to say that $18 million is a lot of money, and we're very grateful for the amount of projects that we were able to fund. But the fact that we had 380 million in requests was alarming, I think, to everyone in water. I don't think that we really truly knew how much of a need there was. In FY 25, much of the same. We had 286 applications submitted for 227 million in total requests, and 27 million was available to award. Again, 27 million's a lot of money, so thank you so much for the dollars that were put into this program, helping communities across Kansas, communities that you live in, and helping Kansas across the entire state. All right. So I'm going to move on to the next two pages. These are the State Water Plan Fund recommendations for the budget, and I believe that the Kansas Water Office will go through this in great detail with you, so I won't go through it line item by line item. But I would like to go through a little bit of detail on the next two pages, pages 14 and 15. So every year, the Kansas Water Authority, in keeping with our obligations, makes recommendations for state policy. And we put those into our annual report and then bring them to you. It's much like I work for a nonprofit, and my job is to take to my board of directors any problems that I have so that they can talk about how to solve them. And this is what we're doing here. We're bringing you the state policy recommendations that we have, areas where we feel like we need to solve a problem. And we bring it so that we can highlight it and bring it to your attention in keeping with our statutory obligations. So the first one that we have listed is the Kansas Water Implementation Framework. And so we'd like to ask that the legislature support the recommendations of the Kansas Water Plan Implementation Framework and request that the governor and the legislature consider supporting the recommendations. And Julie Lorenz will go through that in detail with you after I'm done today. But we wanted to make sure that we let you know that we are fully in support of the program that we've spent all year working on. The second item is project management support. I think my slides are in a different order. So State Water Plan Fund budget increase. So I'll go over that first since it's on the slide deck. If you look at page 15, the Water Authority made a request for additional funding recommended of $20 million. We broke that down in terms of the 5 guiding principles of the State Water Plan. We'd like to move towards these budget categories to highlight the needs across the state, but as we've been saying all across Kansas, it's important that we remain agency agnostic when we're talking about the budget. We want to solve problems, and we want to provide outcomes and be transparent. And the way that the budget was lined out before, it was difficult to do that. So we're moving towards a different framework that Julie will talk about, and as well as the Kansas Water Office in more detail. But in this report, the Kansas Water Authority wanted to show that we support the new framework. We think it's the best path forward to solve problems across the state, and that we have an additional $20 million that we recommended for a ramp-up period. And the governor's budget has $30 million in her budget, and her budget was built on the recommendations from the Kansas Water Authority. She also included additional $10 million for those grant programs that I just talked about in her budget. We did not include that in our budget recommendation, but at the time, we worked on the items that we thought that needed some additional attention. For example, we have additional dollars that we put back in here for conservation districts, for the John Redmond Reservoir Hydrosuction Pilot Project, and there's others through here that I know that you can see. Additional item that we wanted to recommend for state policy was project management support. We are recommending that the Water Office engage project management support to manage the implementation framework, programs, and recommendations. And we recognize that long-term capacity building within the agencies is necessary to effectively and efficiently implement large-scale water investments. Short-term management support will be critical to ensure the success of additional funds in the coming fiscal years. So we included that in our annual report as well. And the last page of our document gives you a brief overview of the strategic implementation planning that we worked on this year. And I'm going to leave this for Julie to talk about in more detail, but we were very busy this year. It's been a really productive year. We heard from Kansans all across the state. We had 5 Water Authority meetings and webinars, 28 Regional Advisory Committee meetings. You can read the statistics over on the left-hand side of this portion, but we had a lot of Kansans that showed up and told us the things that they were interested in seeing across the state and what their biggest challenges were. The one thing that we did hear over and over is that we should have a ramp-up period. If we're going to implement a statewide 10-year program, we need a period of time to ramp up because we need our agencies to be ready to support that kind of a program, to deliver on the things that we hear from Kansans across the state. So you'll see in our recommendations, we're asking for funding for a 2-year ramp-up period that allows the agencies to get ready for a 10-year program. And Julie, again, will go through more detail with that for you this morning. So we have those 2 documents and then the 3 flyers. Before I end, I just wanted to again say thank you to all of you for your hard work on water. This committee has been instrumental in advancing water discussions across the state, and I want to thank you for your time and energy and your service to Kansas. Thank you, sir.
Are there any questions for Dawn? I guess if no one else does, I do.
Yes, sir.
On the ramp up, and maybe Connie might need to pipe in here also. In 23, we asked you guys in the Water Office to come up with a brand new program, a loan grant program that you didn't already have in-house. that took several months to put together, and you did an amazing job to get those applications coming back in by November, in my opinion. So when we're talking about ramping up, it's giving the agencies time to build the capacity. Am I close? You want to address that slightly?
Yes, Mr. Chair, good morning. Connie Owen with the Water Office. Yes, that's exactly what that means, is we need additional staffing. We are probably also going to be needing to hire some outside help on particular components of things that we need to do, but we do need help. All the agencies do, all three, with additional staffing to be able to support doing the additional work that the residents of Kansas have identified and asked us to do. So, yes, sir.
When you're talking agencies, you're talking Division of Water Resources, Water Office, KDHE?
And I hope I'm not getting out of line with my colleagues, but yes, I think we all realize we need additional help to do additional things. And one thing I would mention is that doesn't happen quickly. So the sooner we have the funding and the ability to do it, it's a lot easier to have the staff ready and train them and get them going rather than to have the task assigned to do now, and then you have to get staff, which is what we found out with the grant programs. So we suddenly had these new grant programs to create and administer, but we were not able to hire. We tried, we posted the positions, didn't get good response from that. And we have, over the past year now, I guess last summer, we were able to hire a grant specialist to come in and help, but that was another year later. So it did draw from existing staff, which they've done a fantastic job, but we do need the ramp up in order to do the work. So we can't just be assigned the work and then be expected to absorb that. So if I'm speaking out of turn for the other agencies, then I would certainly stand corrected.
Okay. Representative Pishney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this can be for any of the participants. I like to always, and I hesitate to use the phrase be devil's advocate because I don't like the word devil, but to look at the other side. So whether it be Don or anybody in the room, what if we can't do any additional funding? And I saw those numbers, 200 and some million requests and 27 million funded. But what do you believe is the negative consequence for not doing anything additional?
That's a very good question. And the answer is that we're going to continue to have declining water quality. The Ogallala Aquifer will continue to decline, and along with it, the stability of that part of the state. On the eastern side of the state, our reservoirs are filling in with sediment, and they provide water to downstream users for drinking water and industries. There are a lot of industries in eastern Kansas that rely on the reservoirs for water. Our farmers rely on the water, both from reservoirs that feed the river systems in which they pull water from, but also from the western part of the state. And so we're going to continue to see a decline. And over time, I hate to be, like you said, the devil's advocate, but there will be towns that will have to close. I mean, we have water issues that we need to deal with. They have technical problems with their water systems that they need to deal with. They don't have the funding. They don't have the expertise. So there's a lot of challenges. And what we want to do with this new program is make sure that all Kansans have 2 generations of water, which is 50 years of water. And so each generation prepares for the next 2. So for example, I love thinking this way, but my job is to make sure that my grandson has water. My grandson lives in Colby, Kansas. So what can I do to make sure that he grows up with water? So I think those are the worst of the consequences, but in Julie's presentation, she's got a slide that I think is really wonderful that talks about the dollar impact, like how many contaminated sites will you clean up with this amount of money? And how much, if you have more funding, how many will you clean up? And how many need to be cleaned up? So that information is in her presentation, and I think you'll find it very helpful.
Mr. Chairman, just one quick follow-up. To clarify, I believe that water is our #1 issue in western Kansas. It may be in other areas of the state too with the reservoirs and so forth. So I'm not saying I'm anti-water support or water benefits because it's quality and quantity, which you've addressed both. But I think so many times we talk about adding staff, adding people, adding programs. We talk about benefits of doing such that we forget to help our constituents become educated about what if we don't. And that's the gist of my question. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir, for your question.
Representative Blacks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I guess a little compliment. I remember when we passed 2302, I basically had a little conversation with Director Owens about you better do a good job because eyes are going to be on you. And I really, I guess for one, having worked for state agency, appreciate the working across with Department of Ag and KDHE. I think it's been phenomenal. And I know there's always been problems there and always probably will be a few, but I appreciate the working and, you know, dividing that money up and the areas of responsibility. I think done a good job in that area. And that helps when we look at future funding and making that tough request for future staff, which is always hard and difficult to get extra people up here. So I do appreciate you working through that and with the other agencies. I think it's a good compliment of what we've done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I second that. Representative Vaughn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Don. It's so good to see you. I was wondering, for all of the grant program applications you received from 2302 that went unfunded, was there a way to determine kind of the priority or the urgency of those unfunded projects? And is that something that we should be looking at in the budget as well to potentially fund those projects that we know really need to get done in the near future?
Sir, may I ask Director Owen to answer that question?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, there we go.
Victoria.
Good morning. My name is Victoria Asbury with the Kansas Water Office. Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say as part of our ranking system, we do prioritize what we call like emergent issues or emergency situations. So we do try and push those to the top of our ranking to address those as soon as possible. For those that are unfunded, we do point them towards other grant opportunities, whether it's through state agencies or federal opportunities that exist. So yeah, we do try and assist those communities with the most emergent issues first. But of course, as Dawn has shared, there's only so much funding and a lot of need. So we do our best, but definitely more need is out there.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Quick follow-up to that. Is there a way to kind of get of the remaining communities that have those emergent issues that are currently unfunded or have been able to be unfunded through other sources, is there a way to get an idea of that number in case we wanted to add something like that to the budget?
Yeah, I think that that's something that we can definitely work on. I mean, every community is going to say that their issue is urgent or emergent, but I think that we could review our kind of next layer of applications and identify those that are the most urgent by definition.
Okay, it doesn't have to be very specific, just kind of curious broadly, like how much above what our annual allocation it might be to see if that's some kind of supplement that we might want to consider.
Sure, yeah, the Water Office is happy to provide that for the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any thoughts as far as how you want the water program to be funded if we have more funding or a 10-year program? I think in 2302 we dedicated a portion of the sales tax to fund it. Would you want a higher percentage of the sales tax or more SGF funding or new fees or new taxes to pay for it?
In all honesty, the Kansas Water Authority, I speak on behalf of them, and we're one board, one voice, and the committee has not discussed where the money would come from. We're leaving that up to your body to determine that.
Any further questions? Yes, Representative Simmons.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about what the additional funds will do to support urban areas like Topeka, KCK, and Wichita?
I'm going to look at the water office to see if you have a better idea of the breakdown of those dollars.
As Dawn had mentioned earlier, we'll be back for a more specific, in-depth discussion of the recommendations, but remember, we have the 3 agencies. We have Division of Water Resources and Water Office and KDHE, and so a lot of water quality issues would be helpful to Topeka. The reservoir issues that we're working on directly impact the water supply in Topeka, so we can go into some of those details in the future, so thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Dawn.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure.
Appreciate the update. And while you're here, there is a Kansas Water Authority meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the Sunflower Foundation, Northwest Topeka. It's west of Cedar Crest a little ways. Am I close? Okay. If you don't have committee meetings in the morning and able to attend, it's nice to watch this group work. They're very diverse, but they work together well and represent the grassroots of Kansas in giving their recommendations for the water office funding. Thank you. And now we have Julie Lorenz back to give us an update.
Thank you. Julie Lorenz, serving as consultant for the implementation framework. Thank you all for having me back today. If we can pull up the presentation, please. And as that comes up, a couple of quick notes. First, the presentation that you have now is, I would consider this to be the full packet. So we have some additional detail today that we didn't have in sort of the Framework 101 from last week. I'll do the best I can not to duplicate information that I've already shared. I would also suggest there's a lot of detail that can be made available about each of these recommendations. Each of you may have 1 or 2 areas that you are more interested in than others. So fully offer the agencies and the governor's office to convene one-on-one meetings with each of you or smaller groups, whatever you want, so that you feel like you are fully briefed on the issues that are of greatest importance to you. So with that as a backdrop, we'll move forward. We talked last week about the extensive amount of input that's been used to shape the recommendations. And we talked about the urgency with which we need to move. More than 100 Kansas communities are at risk of 25 years or less of water supply. We know that Kansans are supportive of an increase in terms of funding for the implementation of the water program at $140 million. Some people say more. Also, we know that it's important to have this ramp-up period that Dawn has talked about. You don't just start on $140 million a year out of nowhere. Not that work hasn't been done, but to both ramp up and evaluate and make sure that dollars are being used effectively. All of that needs to be put in place. Thus, there's the 2-year ramp-up suggestion. I want to spend just a moment on this piece. I don't know that I hit it hard enough last week. Yes, there is an important health aspect to the water piece, but also an economic impact. We know that businesses that are looking to relocate are often looking for at least a 40-year supply of water. And in order to keep businesses, we have to have water available. So there's both an economic impact, also a health benefit as it relates to water. We talked a bit about this last week, but it's really a package of a 2-year ramp-up period that leads to a 10-year program undergirded by 8 specific recommendations, and they all work hand in glove. And we talked a bit about that last week. This is a new slide, and probably, in my opinion, the one that best explains what's at work, what's at play here, and the roles that various entities play. And so we'll start at the very top. with green being legislative, blue being agencies, and yellow being stakeholders. So when we talk about this ramp-up period, agencies can begin some of this work right now in terms of some evaluation, moving forward with some of the 2302 mini. That and some of the refinements, they can start that work now. But the role that the legislature can have is in increased funding at this $30 million recommendation. I'll talk about what those would work toward. But it's a hand-in-glove sort of approach. So that is one piece that I want to call your attention to. Agencies can begin to develop evaluation metrics already. So that work is already underway, and have those work for the full 10-year period and be able to report out outcomes. Then when you look at this local consult every 2 years, along with RAC meetings, report progress that's being made and work with stakeholders to refine programs. So Representative Pishney, to your point, we owe it to taxpayers to say, are these programs working? And in places where they're working really well, perhaps we shift some funds so that we can accelerate progress in some areas. In some programs, if they're not working quite as well as we wanted, we'll talk with stakeholders, we'll talk with the legislature to refine those programs. And in some cases, you might get rid of a program. So there's that ability to be adaptive and to make changes and to continually revise, update, and evaluate. So, but you don't just do that in a vacuum, because everybody relies on something that's being done. So you don't just pull it away, but you do have those conversations and in concert with the legislature. Okay, so then you see this bar 2526 where it says the legislature establishes long-term dedicated revenue source. To Representative, to your point, while the Water Authority and the framework don't provide recommendations specific to funding sources, we talk to Kansans about that. And if you look in the appendix at the back end of the framework, you will see what Kansans had to say about various revenue sources. Certainly some interest in sales tax. Certainly interest in knowing that the dollars that dollars are returned to regions that generate those dollars. That's nothing new. You hear that all the time for sure. But you will see some information. There's not a recommendation, but there is information in there that you might find helpful as you have your deliberations. Okay, something that that is important to note, and this is a lesson from transportation, is that in 2018, there was a legislative task force that went all around the state to talk about what would the next 10-year transportation program look like. And that was chaired by Representative Prael and Senator McGinn. And we learned a lot going around the state. I think there were 13 meetings. Then in 2019, we took the thinking of the task force, and KDOT then went around and did these local consult meetings to put more meat on the bone, so to speak. In some ways, that local consult process has, to some degree, occurred already, so you have the benefit of those kinds of conversations. And then in 2020, on a Thursday afternoon, and it would have been around like March 16th to 20th, because it was an abbreviated session due to COVID, but it was a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock, the IKE program was passed, the 10-year program, with 94% support on both sides of the aisle. That wasn't magic. That happened because of all the work and all the input that went into crafting that package. And I think it's really pretty remarkable and such an opportunity for this group to be at what could be the beginnings of this 10-year approach to water and shaping the way our state will deliver water going forward. Representative Black, she talked about the agencies all working together. We can benefit from the lessons learned from KDOT and take some of those lessons and put that into the shaping of a 10-year water program. So I think there's just great opportunity. So then, you see the green box there, that by 2027, you would pass a 10-year transportation program. And there's a distinction here between how much money, the dedicated revenue source, and the program aspects. Each of those are important. So I don't minimize any of those three. All three of those pieces have to come together, the thinking part and the money part and the support part. And it takes a while for all of that to kind of gel. And then that's where you see the 10-year program, an ongoing reporting period, but at the end of 10 years, and not really at the end of 10 years, but a couple of years before the end of the 10 years, you start thinking about what that next 10-year program looks like. So this is how the whole thing can work. And we have been doing the work to get to this point, and it becomes a partnership between the legislature, the governor's office, and the agencies, and stakeholders and taxpayers. Okay. We talked a bit about being both bold in vision and practical by tracking our progress and making incremental improvements. And we talked a bit about a fiscally responsible approach. Also, if you want me to stop on any of these slides, I'm happy to. I'm just trying to get to the new material for you all. We also talked about this dynamic program, setting a 50-year view of water, so 2075. 10 years from now, when we get to 2035, we're thinking about the next 10-year program. We push that out to 2085 and think about what are the actions we need to take to assure water supply in 2085. Okay, this is something I want to spend just a minute on. So in the framework document, we speak to 60 million, 140 million, and what those outcomes might look like. What we have added now, and this is in that yellow box at the bottom, are the outcomes that could be associated with the additional $30 million. And today isn't a detailed budget view, but I do want to give you a sense of what's included in that $30 million enhancement. It wouldn't have been appropriate to have included that level of detail in the framework, because the framework is intended to be a document that lasts for a good amount of time. This $30 million is the governor's recommendation. So I'm happy to speak to a little bit of that, but I know you have a budget, you'll have budget meetings to go into more detail. But it's important to understand how the base, the ramp, gets you to the 10 years. Okay. We talked last week about how we got to the 140 million. It's not an arbitrary number. It's what Kansans support, and it's associated with outcomes that could be delivered in that time frame. There's actually a physical limit to how much work you can produce or what you can in terms of infrastructure build. So we're at 140, perhaps more could be allocated, but that's the number that we have tagged everything to. This one, I want to spend a moment on this. So again, from transportation. And again, I would say that you could be at the beginning of something different, which is, I think, exciting. And you don't often in your careers get a chance to really be at the beginning of something. So at KDOT, when we look at funding, we look at expansion, modernization, and preservation projects. And then under those three big categories, we nest a lot of individual programs. Very similar here. You could, by agency and by program, do allocations very individually. I would suggest to you, though, it's more effective to think about what are the big problems you're trying to solve, which is water quality and quantity and work on reservoirs, resiliency, and research and education. So you think about how much money are we going to invest to solve these problems? And then you get into the detail of which agencies and how much, that sort of thing. It's a shift in thinking that I think is really important to start thinking about problem solving and not individual budget lines. That comes next. But you start with what are we trying to solve? It's been very effective at KDOT, and it's a different way of thinking than, back to your point, about the three agencies delivering more than 50 different programs. So really honing in on problem solving. Okay, so now these are a new series of slides, and I don't pretend to know every single detail about each one of these, and I would call on the agencies to provide responses to any detailed questions. But what I can tell you is these are slides that very directly speak to what Kansans have asked, and honestly what a lot of legislators have asked as we went around the state. So let's start off here at the top. We know that we have more than 140 contaminated sites that need to be remediated. So Representative Pishney, this kind of gets to your question. What happens if not? Which is a good question. So with the base budget, with the $60 million base budget, we could address 4 sites in 2027. If there is this ramp-up enhancement, we could get to 6 sites. And if we were to get to 140 million, in about 2 years, with some additional ramp-up, but 140 million over 10 years, we could get to more than 50 sites. So that shows you the need, what can be accomplished with the base, with the enhancement, and over 10 years. And we have a series of slides that walk you through that. I also need to keep, because we go till 10:30? Okay, so I want to balance detail with opportunity for questions. Okay, this slide, for example, to orient you to this slide, across the top where it says 60, 90, and 140, That is not how much we're providing for groundwater support. Rather, that associates with the base, the ramp up, and the 10-year program. Under the base, we could get to septic system repairs and replacement or private well testing in 10 counties. You add some money to that, $500,000, you can get to 25. By the end of 10 years, we've gotten to more than 50 counties, and recognizing that there are multiple locations within any one county. So that's, again, how this sort of like overall program works to build upon itself. The next slide, this is a good example of the difference in scale. So in some places in the enhancement, in the 30 million, it's only $500,000 only. It's still a lot of money, but in relative terms, it's $500,000 in one category. It might be 10 million in another category, which is associated with infrastructure improvements, those grant programs that have been, as you said, Representative Vaughn, so wildly popular and needed. So you'll see the enhancement package ties increases based on need and ability to deliver within a year or two's time frame. We have the same sort of information available as it relates, for example, to these reservoirs. So a $3 million one-time investment in the hydrosection pilot project for sedimentation at John Redmond. You can see by the end of the 10-year period that we've addressed in reservoir sediment in all of these reservoirs, water supply for 1.7 million Kansans. So by category, we identify what we can do with the base, with the enhancement, and in 10 years. And these are highlights. The next one, on the resiliency piece. These are the grant dollars, Representative Vaughn, that you talked a bit about. We can get to about 60 communities at $17 million. The $10 million, which is a big portion of the $30 million enhancement, we can get to about 80 communities. Now, I think this is an interesting piece to note here, where you see at the far right, where it says we want to get to about 200 communities, annual funding TBD. I think this is a really forthright comment here. We're going to learn as we go. It would be, I think, premature to say exactly how much we're going to need across the 10 years. That's something that, two things, we need to evaluate how the programs are going. We need to talk to Kansans, do more regional planning to understand what those needs might look like. So we're giving you the best numbers we can give you based on what we know, and where we don't know, we'll say TBD, okay? So there's still work to be done. The agency stepped up and did a heck of a lot of work since February of last year, but I wouldn't suggest that our work is complete on getting all of the budgeting done. But that gives you a good sense of we'd like to get to at least 200 communities, maybe more. Okay, on the dam construction side of things, we know we've got more than 500 dams that are in need of repair and maintenance and inspections. We can get to 40 this year with the base budget. We could get to 60 with a ramp up by 27. And 200 is what we would shoot for within a 10-year program. So you can see, you're still not getting to all the dams that need it. But it is, getting close to half. With more money, we could do more. We're just trying to be responsible with the dollars that we would like to think could be available, right? So we're not just saying, like, here's the need. There's never going to be enough money for everything you want and need. So we've tried to be realistic. Again, that's what the process is for in terms of a legislative discussion is, 200 dams enough? Is that too much? The beauty of this program is it's scalable. You can move that lever up and down as you think about what could be invested. And that's an important, it's an important lever for the legislature to have. Okay, this one. Okay, so I cannot recall a Kansan that said, I would really like for you to invest in research and education through an independent program accountability and evaluation program. Like, nobody actually said all those words. But what Kansans did say is, we want to know how our dollars are being used and are they effective. And if they're not, like, please make some changes. And that's what this shows, is an independent review to take a look at the programs and how dollars are being used. And as I've already said, where we're getting outcomes, maybe we put more money into those programs. Where things are not panning out as we want, to be forthright about that and to make changes. and consider in some cases perhaps even eliminating programs. But we have to do that, set the metrics, and do that evaluation. And so you can see here, in the base, we've got about $900,000 in the governor's enhancement. You see that pumps up by $500,000 to get us to $1.4 million so that we can accelerate the development of those metrics in the testing and get to about $2 million on an ongoing basis for evaluation and testing and reporting of those results. Okay, so in terms of the overall budget summary, this is the proposed amount that includes $60 million in base plus the 30 in the ramp up. These pieces all work together with the recommendations. So we talked a bit last week about the recommendations. Now I'm going to spend, and I just sort of alluded to those today, I'll be able to spend a little more time with you. So, quick overview. These are the, like we're not in March, we're getting closer. These are like the elite 8. We could have had 100 recommendations. We honed in on the 8 most important that we think really are going to change the way we deliver water in Kansas and will be most cost effective. So I'll spend a little time with each one of these today and happy to take questions. I'll try to save a good amount of time for questions at the end. So the first one, and happy to come back with even more detail, but I will talk a bit about what's included in the recommendation, what we can include, what we can achieve in 2 years and what we can achieve in 10 years in each of these recommendations. You'll see there's a little gold box on each of these slides, and it helps relate how the investments support the implementation of these recommendations. Okay, so we talked last week about this rolling program and each generation being responsible for next 2 generations. Dawn did a beautiful job of talking about, I want to leave my grandson in Colby 2 generations of water, hoping that then her son will leave not just his son, but her great-grandson. This rolling program is the concept here. And so what it does is it aligns our programs and our investments in aquifers, reservoirs, water quality, and resiliency under a common objective. We finally have one thing, as Representative Blex talked about, one thing that all the agencies are pegging their investments to. It's this multi-generational promise of water. It also will allow us to then better prioritize investments and evaluate those investments. In 2 years, we will develop a science-based definition of what this means. Like currently we can't even say, like, what does that mean we need to be doing to achieve 2 years, 50 years of water? We have ideas of which communities are at risk, but we need to make sure there's a common definition and we're all working in the same direction. That takes into account economic growth, population numbers, all of those different pieces that go into a community on both the west and east side of our state. And then in 10 years, Kansans will have access to at least 50 years of water or live in a community or region with a plan to achieve it. We know that not every community has 50 years worth of water right now, but we need to develop plans so that they can get there. And by the end of this 10 years, communities would be able to understand how they could have 50 years of water. And it might mean in some places that you have to pump and pipe water. I mean, we have to figure out what that even looks like for some of our basins. Okay, next slide. And I'm sorry, I didn't cover, but in that gold box, it shows money for the hydrosuction pilot and money for the dams and money for infrastructure projects in small towns. So we are tagging the investments to this recommendation. Okay, this one, regional planning and project development. This one near and dear to my heart because what we need to do is we need to have a pipeline of projects, so to speak. We need to know on a region by region basis what, in order to achieve this 50 years of water supply, what are the projects that are needed? Where do we have lots of leaky pipes? Where might we have to look at additional conservation measures? This is the work that needs to be done, and when I get to reallocation in a minute, you'll understand the real importance of this. But understanding from a regional perspective how we can achieve that 50 years, and that's what this planning helps us start to do. Okay, I think I covered that. All right, this one is a great story. So this regional evaluation. So you all may be familiar with Caney, almost ran out of water. They're going to buy their water from Coffeyville. They're going to buy about 250,000 gallons of treated water per day. Helps Coffeyville. Coffeyville has a water department. This is like they've added a whole new customer. And Caney needs the water. It's a regional approach. What we are suggesting in this recommendation is that every community, before they get a grant, they will have considered if they could be part of a regional approach. Not every place physically does it work every place in our state, but in many places it does. And we're going to say, if you want grants, if you want to move forward, you need to be thinking longer term, and you need to have evaluated that potential. That's what that recommendation says. Again, it's about water basin planning and making sure that we're not just thinking about the next 5 years, but the 50 years that is our water promise. Okay. Streamlining water programs goes back to, we have 14 agencies that deliver a variety of water programs. We have 3 primary agencies. We need to streamline those programs. We need to make it easier for Kansans to access programs, to understand who to call. We need a one-door policy so that if I call about a water issue, I'm going to get the same answer regardless of which agency I call. So it's really important to start streamlining our programs, making them more accessible. I think foundational to that is to start thinking about solving problems rather than this line-by-line appropriation. It'll take a while to get there, but that's what this one speaks to. Okay, this one is a personal favorite too, this dashboard. I see this as the bridge between state data, state understanding, and I'll tell you, across Kansas, there is huge, and I think Representative Pishney could back me up on this. I think Representative Minix could back me up on this. There's a huge tradition of local control when it comes to water. This, I think, is the bridge to better cooperation and coordination between state and local. This becomes the way for people to understand how much water supply do I have based on this common definition that we put together. It allows local governments to have better conversations with their producers and their citizens. So if you're in Hayes and you've been working for 20 years to try to get your residents to conserve water, or if you're on the east side of the state and you need people to quit watering their lawns when it's raining, I mean, you know, pick your situation. It allows people on the west to understand how much water they have left, and on the east side, we have lots of examples where reservoirs are filling up with silt, and you may think you've got a lot of water supply left when in fact it's rapidly diminishing, or you don't have the capacity to manage floodwaters. This is the idea of what this map would show based on state data and local data combined, so that people would understand by community what's my water situation, and it helps state and locals work together to communicate with residents about what their water future really looks like. That is an example. It's not real data, but it becomes the tool for informing decisions and for good conversations, even when honestly some of those conversations are tough to have. Okay, problem solving. This is problem solving through outcomes. I think you've probably heard me say this, if not once, 1,000 times. But this is a shift, again, into accountability and saying, here, based on these investments, here are the outcomes that we can produce. It is different than trying to fund a program by program by program with the hope or the belief it will make an improvement. This is the data that will provide you with that assurance. So within 2 years' time, we'll identify which programs will be evaluated, including initial metrics and timelines, and then determine how that information will be shared with Kansans through a local consult process. And we'll continue to prioritize state dollars based on those outcomes. We'll secure project management support to accelerate progress, address staff shortages and expertise and skill gaps. So much as Director Owen talked about, you can't necessarily hire all the skill sets that you need. You might want to, or you might decide we want to get some of these programs set up and then have staff manage them on an ongoing basis. So there's some flexibility here in whether these are additional hires, which are needed, and some of this would be consultant support. But in 10 years, all programs would have an evaluation process, metrics, and an input process to make adjustments and timelines. Okay, the next one is to prioritize cost share programs to reduce water and have a greater return on investment. So to be clear, nobody has to change what they're doing right now. You're free to continue to do your work the way you want to do your work. But if you want to qualify for some cost share. What we would suggest in the next 2 years with state dollars, cost share with using state dollars, is that you get bonus points if you're in a LEMA or WCA or in other places. Research shows that sometimes if you get better technology, you grow more. You don't necessarily conserve water. You're just more efficient. You grow more. You haven't changed your water usage pattern. So that is something that we want to be mindful of when it comes to taxpayer dollars, is that we're actually seeing a reduction in water use, not greater growing efficiency. What you want is greater growing efficiency with reduced water use. And over 10 years, and we need to do a lot of evaluation to see how that rolls, but the current thinking here is to award bonus points. Not that you're not eligible for cost share, but you get bonus points if you're in a LEMA, WCA, or other area that has water reduction measures in place. And then this one, a shout out to Senator Fagg over in, just saw him in Senate Ag. So this is a great example of working in coordination and collaboration with our federal delegation. So, and I think Director Owen talked about this just last week. Interest, the way interest is now calculated is, instead of being compound interest, it'll go to a single interest. And we are able to save in Kansas about $40 million. And of that, the governor suggested using $30 million to support these enhancement packages. And this is on reservoir interest payments. So that's where the source of this money comes for the next 2 years for ramp up. Director Owen talked, and Don talked a bit about this, is that we do need to build capacity. We need, the agencies have stepped up and they've worked incredibly hard this last year to both get grant funding out and to do this whole local consult process and put this whole thing together. We know that we're going to need more people. And I would say, like, this is a good example when you look at the independent evaluation. That is not likely to be agency staff. I think you want independent, you want to hire an outside source to put those evaluation metrics in place. So you can see here, these are included in the ramp up. This planning and project development, I'm going to come back to why that's so important. Okay, last week I showed you this series of slides about, like, how does this process work? So for irrigation technology, move forward and give these bonus points if you're in a LEMA or other place, if you're going to do cost share. We are going to evaluate, this is in the first 2 years, evaluate the effectiveness of the program. Are we making good progress towards 15% reduction in water use without impact to profitability? Can we get technology upgrades out to about 400 irrigation systems? Then as we move toward this $140 million annually, we would go out to local consult. We'd say, how is it working? Communities or producers, what do you think? We would share how the technology upgrades have or haven't worked. Are they getting us toward this 15% reduction? If they aren't, how could we improve performance? Such that, again, we keep this circular, we implement programs, we evaluate, we talk to folks if we need to make changes, so that by the end of the decade, by 2035, we will have achieved a 15% reduction in water usage through technology with producers that doesn't impact profitability. This slide, which I showed last week, also helps connect the challenges that we face with the recommendations in the implementation plan. This one I talked about last week. Thank you for the support you've given. There is great interest across the state, as demonstrated even as recently as last Friday. So Friday afternoon, I'm not kidding, it's like 4:30. We are walking stakeholders through line by line of this sort of, like, what are the recommendations? What's in the governor's budget? What are we trying to accomplish? How's the thinking changing? By 4:30, we still had 200 stakeholders on the phone. And that's on a Friday afternoon. And I was like, wow. The water stakeholders, I think, are more interested than transportation stakeholders, I think I might say. We would have scheduled that for probably Wednesday afternoon. It's really remarkable to me. There is great need and interest in this whole process. And I just thought Friday afternoon, I was like, that is the demonstration. 200 folks at 4:30 on Friday afternoon. Okay, I said I'd talk a bit about this. This pipeline piece is so important. And I would say on this slide, this is about money, and thinking, and both are important. Both are very important. So this represents about $3.3 million. So those are funds that were not used previously in the last year. And oftentimes, you might just sort of say, all right, well, 3.3 million, that's going to be a carryover balance. The governor has said, no, we have too many water needs across the state. I want those reallocated. Well, just like in transportation, if we say get good bid prices, we'll go ahead and do another mile or two or whatever those dollars will allow. We always have projects ready to go at KDOT so that you can take those dollars and apply them in other ways should you get good prices. Or if one project over here runs into a big like environmental snag and you can't get it let to construction, you can move those dollars to another place. Same principles working here. So that first went up, $1 million to go to the Equus beds, the chloride plume to address that. And you can see here, the reallocation at $1 million, what it's going to address, and how it relates to the framework recommendations. $500,000 for stock water efficiency program. We know that one, and I want to make sure I get to my right notes because that one is important. The state receives millions in requests. We're going to get $500,000 more there. We're going to get $500,000 more suggested for contamination remediation. $500,000 for this independent program evaluation. It jumpstarts the recommendations. And then $880,000 to begin this basin by basin risk assessment for 2 pilot areas. So the importance of this regional planning is so that you've got a pipeline of projects. Should something not work for some reason in one part of the state or in that region, you have projects ready to apply the dollars to later. It's a responsible way to manage the dollars and get to projects that citizens need sooner rather than later. And so this is a slide I hope to continue to land on in every session, in every presentation this session, because this is really what matters. It's about us, but more importantly, it's about the next generation and the next generation and making sure Joe, who wants to be able to go home and farm, will have some water, and that his kids that he doesn't even have yet will also have that opportunity if they so choose. And so that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to stand for questions and would be quick to acknowledge I'm probably going to need a lot of help from the agencies.
Are there any questions? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Julie. This is really exciting to me, and so yeah, I might have a little bit of a soapbox here, and just thank you so much for all the work you guys have done to continue. I think the work that has been started by many of the advocates in the committee, both in terms of 2302 with how do we create a long-term funding source, how do we move beyond the 5-year bill that we've passed to deliver something that's strategic and addresses a lot of the needs that have yet to be identified and that we should approach strategically into the future. So I love the framework that you've created for that. And then also even building off of 2279 and this idea that we need strategic conservation plans and, that focusing on groundwater management districts, but how do we apply that to the whole state? And so I really love the direction of this framework. I love all the work that you guys have done. I think this is really exciting. So I guess my questions are, how do we ensure that the 2-year ramp-up period is successful? What as a committee can we do to make sure that that happens? Both in regards to funding and then the task force. And then, I think the part that I'm most excited about with this framework is the strategic long-term water supply plans. Really evaluating, what are our needs as a state in terms of quantity and quality. It looks like you guys are interested in doing that on a basin by basin planning process. And I guess I'm just kind of curious to learn more about your goals with that and the importance of that, and then kind of like how you've seen that be successful with transportation and why it's really important that we approach it that way with water. And I think water is a little bit different. Like there are sociological elements to it. There are other aspects to it, but why it's important that we approach it in a strategic, long-term way as well?
Yes, thanks. Several good questions in there. I'll start with water and transportation are different. Water is a natural resource, and there's sort of this two-way street with water that doesn't exist in transportation, because there's a Mother Nature element of it rains or we have drought. It's not fair in that not all parts of the aquifer recharge at the same rate. I mean, there are just some built-in pieces that are just much more difficult than transportation. But I think there are lessons from transportation that can be really helpful. This idea of local consult and communities understanding how they can engage on an ongoing basis, and this pipeline of projects. So you don't just create this pipeline of projects or programs in isolation. You do that in concert with your stakeholders, right? So when we do local consult at KDOT, we don't just evaluate projects on technical merit, though that's a big part of it. We also ask communities to come in and help us understand why it's particularly important to them. And so like when I talked about that dashboard, it's this it's the work with communities, with your stakeholders that is so important, because so much of what needs to happen here is not just investment, but it's stakeholders not conserving or changing some practices in places. Or on the sediment side of things, you know, I would say this committee, I enjoyed, you know, great rapport with House and Senate Transportation. They were really understanding about saying, let's try this. And that's some of what's going on here is like, if agencies don't have it exactly right, to be willing to understand this worked, this didn't work, we need to change this approach. I can also point out, for example, in some parts of the state where everybody wants their 4-lane, it is too expensive to build and maintain 4 lanes everywhere. So in some places you have to work closely with communities to say, like, I know you want this. This is what as a state we can afford to do. Let's make the best of what we can afford to do. This basin planning, and at KDOT we call it regional planning. This basin planning is super important so that as you're making investments in this part of the state, you also know what you need to invest in this part of the state, because you have to have some geographic balance. If your program gets too far out of geographic balance, you will not have the support you need across the state. So on an ongoing basis, you have to report out what's being accomplished, where the investments are going, and what they're achieving. And that begins in this committee, so that you all can ask I would much rather come to a committee and have difficult questions here and then go figure out the answers before I go to the general public. So then I can have a good conversation with them and then bring their thoughts back. So it becomes kind of a fluid sort of process. And I would say also some good private sector practices come into place too, in terms of the accountability and the reporting piece. So I would also say, and this, I think Gary might be here. Gary Jansen I don't know if Gary's here or not, but Public Works Director for Wichita, he and I have talked a lot about one of the reasons local consult is successful is because communities know that transportation is going to be funded, and they show up because they know their voice is heard, and it will impact the way projects are evaluated. It's not a vote. You do better planning when you understand the dynamics of a community. So that's part of what's going on. Also, I would say the last thing that's, I think, incredibly important is for communities to have the technical resources they need. This idea, I mean, we'll talk a bit about, or someone will sometime, about 6 district engineers. You can't expect communities, this isn't magic, this is hard work. And so you can't expect communities to do good regional planning if they don't have anyone, a technical resource. I think we have something like 15 county engineers across the whole state. So there is the need to provide some support for professional services so that we are making good use of taxpayer dollars and supporting those communities. There's nothing worse than kind of like wilting on the vine, so to speak. So we need to make sure that we're getting our communities the support they need without overreaching. So that's why it's important to work collaboratively. Also, at the same time, making sure that we're not, there's a quote in one of the slides that we heard, but it was, I thought, it's tough and it's real, which is to say, a community without a plan isn't a good investment. So I understand each of you have to protect your taxpayer dollars, your voters' dollars. So we can't just be like handing out money to those who need it if there isn't a plan and if the proper thinking hasn't been done so that we know we're going to get a decent return on that investment.
Let's give Representative Gardner an opportunity, and we'll, if we have time available, come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And I think you partially answered my question here. But, you know, it's really apparent that, you know, we do have a plan and we're on the road and we are making progress, and you never want to argue with success. And I really do appreciate that. It's also very apparent that the need is rather large, that we're not even able to meet even 10% of the need that exists. My question would be, what kind of public policy do we need to be putting in place so that we, as we move forward, we're not putting all of our public resources into the hands of those who have chronic, you know, the stakeholders. And I've got some of all kinds in my district that have individuals, families, communities, municipalities that have looked forward and put a lot of effort, planning, and money into securing their water resources and their wastewater treatment resources. And we have others that have not paid any attention and just ignored it, and everything in between. So how do we put public policy in place that doesn't just drain all of our public resources into those who have chronically neglected the responsibility that they as individuals and families and communities have, and doesn't really leave an adequate amount for those who have done a good job?
That is a great question. And there's no easy answer, for sure, but I would say that I would go back to this sort of basin planning, because there isn't just a one-size-fits-all kind of answer to that, but it does have to be taken into account. And an example that I gave you previously is around this idea of bonus points for cost share for technology if you are in a LEMA. And some folks would say, no, that's not right. Everybody should be eligible and everybody should have an equal chance for those dollars. But in terms of trying to protect taxpayer dollars, and research shows that you get better outcomes if someone is in an area that has agreed to reduce usage. So you start by moving in a direction. At KDOT, I always said, let's start with bonus points first and see what we can accomplish. And if bonus points don't get us where we need to be, we'll take another look. But it is a tough question, and acting as a steward of taxpayer dollars, it's one that has to be asked, and it may not be this, it may not look the same because our problems are different on the west than they are in the east. So that's not sufficient, but when it comes time to having specific policies, it has to come back to this body so you can be comfortable with those.
Could I ask one more question, please? Okay, so your approach would be then to put that responsibility back onto agencies rather than state policy?
I think we have to figure that out. I think that is, I don't have a clear answer on that yet, because I think part of it depends on what you're trying to achieve. You need the policy or the agency piece to relate to what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve.
Representative Pickert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Julie, thank you for being here. This whole process has been so amazing. When I started on this committee 2 years ago, we really didn't have a plan. We had some money, but it was like, well, okay, let's see how it goes. But so I attended 2 of the listening sessions for the water plan. And the first one, I was like, wow, I don't know. I'm an optimist. And I was like, I heard so much negativity and like they're driving us to say this and that. And the second one was, I feel like there was much more buy-in from, I was in Wichita and lots of different stakeholders were there. And so it's really morphed into this plan, and it's exciting to have a plan because you really can't, you just flounder if you don't have a plan. And I can see that it's going to change a lot over time, but it is a place to start. I think each one of us on this committee, we come from different areas, rural, urban, and in between, you know, small towns, large towns. And I think when we go back and talk to our constituents, we can share what we understand about the water plan and help educate our constituents, and then take information from them and bring it back, because I mean, that's part of our job. And I think we'll get a lot more input and buy-in if we do that. And then the last thing I think is so important is education. I know the water office is hiring an educator for the state, but one person can't cover the state. Education and prevention is going to save us a lot of dollars down the road. And so I think that's so important for us to be looking at that as a key piece to this, so we can conserve what we have. And there are so many people out there that have no clue that we have a water problem. I mean, they're like, really? I didn't know that, and I can't hardly believe that either, but it's true. So I think we really need to look at that. So thank you very much.
Representative Vaughn, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, to quickly circle back, I just wanted to see, how can the committee support the framework? What can we do to ensure that this is a success?
So I would start with Representative Pickert started in a great place. Talk to your constituents, feedback to the agencies, what you're hearing. The conversation around a dedicated funding source won't be easy, but that has been, so two things. Knowing that we have a dedicated motor fuels tax has been so helpful at KDOT. KDOT also relies on sales tax. The benefit of the way the IKE program was constructed is to have two pipelines, so to speak. One is the development pipeline, one is the construction pipeline. So you can meter your construction lettings to the amount of money you have available. The reality is this. State revenues are going to go up and down over time. Expenditures go up and down over time. What you need is two pieces. You need a program that has enough consistent funding that once you get momentum going, that you don't have to like go up and down and have wild swings in what you're investing in water, because some of these projects have a long development timeline and we have ground to make up. So you want a dedicated funding source to some extent, but you also need to have enough flexibility with your program so that if you are not able to fully fund a program in a year, now I'm speaking like the most honest truth, is when you are not able to fund something, the agencies must be able to report transparently what won't be accomplished because those dollars aren't available. That was the problem at KDOT, was to say over and over again, we don't have the money, but somehow we're going to figure it out. Building this connection between investment and outcome is the most important thing. That is what is going to serve our state well, so that you can hold the agencies accountable and you can report to stakeholders. And I think that having the place for the agencies to come and work in collaboration with the legislature is so powerful. But that is like, it sounds simple, but it's actually the hardest thing to do. And this committee has a lot of a similar vibe as House Transportation, and I found that to be a very supportive way to work.
Thank you. I think that makes a great case for a task force or doing something similar like that to identify that long-term strategic funding source. I think that's really important.
And to Representative Gardner's point, and to think through the policies, because as you start to build incentive programs or whatever, whether that's how those get built in a way that the legislature can understand and can be supportive of, really important.
Any further questions? I guess I have a few comments. I have noticed in public policy, it's always best to be transparent, show responsibility, and you've done that over the IKE transportation program. And you ask for input from all levels. I think that's been a great example. What we're trying to do here with water is very similar to that, as you point out. Thursday, we're going to have a presentation on economics here in Kansas to deal with water. I have always argued with the economists that we don't put a value on that water, for example, out in the Ogallala or in a reservoir. If it's something that we have a finite resource that we keep drawing from, it's kind of like my bank account. If I keep pulling out, eventually I'm going to get to zero. We cannot afford to bankrupt this state on water as our resource. And yet we have a balance of how many dollars we want to invest in protecting that resource. Representative Fairchild had a good question earlier about a dedicated sales tax, and that's where we started in 2023. We had dedicated sales tax. I would personally, my opinion, I'd love to see something like that come back. That's a difficult pull here in the legislature, though. But as Julie points out, we need something consistent that the agencies can rely on to keep moving our policy forward and our programs. Anyway, thank you very much, Julie. Thursday, we'll have presentations from the Department of Ag on economics and what water resource does mean here in the state of Kansas. So we'll keep moving forward. I want to thank all the presenters today. It still looks like a team approach out there, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Any further comments? Meeting is adjourned.